Welcome back to the channel. Before we get too far into the actual review of this firearm, there are a couple of disclosures I would like to give you. The first disclosure being is that Smith Wesson did not send me this firearm. It was paid for by me along with all of the ammunition used to make this review. So that means there is no monetary incentive for me to shill for any sort of company. But my buddy Andrew over at Heritage Firearms did hook me up with really good pricing on this thing. So big shout out to him. Besides that, there's not much more to say. Besides, let's get into it. For the first 500 rounds, the firearm is going to look a little bit different than what you see here in the B-roll footage you're going to be watching. Let me explain why. Originally, I had the Trijicon SRO on top, and then I had the TLR-7A. The reason for the TLR-7A is because my Surefire X300 needed the U-plate that I have on it there. All I had was the A-plate. I unfortunately lost my original U-plate the flashlight came with, so I had to order one and wait for it to come in. And then the reason for switching out the SRO with the RMR was mostly due to holster compatibility issues. I even sent an email to Safariland directly just to verify I wasn't overlooking anything on their website, and this was their response. This was the original Safariland holster in the footage you are watching. Safariland doesn't make a dedicated holster for the SRO and the MMP series, so I had to try to modify the ALS system that goes inside of the holster. I modified the holster enough to where I could get it to fit. As you can see, I had to Dremel some of the top off here, and then I had to pretty much Dremel down the majority of the ALS system. After modifying the holster and the ALS system, I was no longer having a fitment issue. I was mostly having an issue with the gun getting stuck inside of the holster. Whenever I had the pistol inside of the holster and I would go draw it, I would obviously have to deactivate the ALS system. Whenever I did that, I would either have to, one, yank really hard on the pistol for it to come out, or two, I would have to tilt the pistol a little bit to the left and then it would come out no problem with no excessive force. The reason for the RMR is because I have another Safariland holster that's compatible with the MMP series. I didn't want to have to modify that one, so I just threw on the RMR. And I stopped modifying the other one because I didn't want it to become unusable. For the first actual range session, I spent the majority of it just getting used to the firearm and the different ergonomics. I've been a Glock stop for pretty much the majority of my life, so there was a little bit of a learning curve. I spent a lot of my time during my first live fire session getting used to the magwell, working on reloads. Other than that, I did take the firearm out to 50 yards and I was able to get consecutive hits at 50. And then I did take the firearm out to 100 and I was able to get a couple of hits at 100. One of my good friends suggested that as I do my range reports, I give an enthusiasm level towards the firearm as if it stays the same, dwindles, or increases over time and towards my next range sessions. I will say my enthusiasm levels at this point are through the roof. I couldn't wait to get out to my next range session to shoot this thing some more. So for my first 500 rounds, no complaints or malfunctions, which is a good thing, only holster compatibility issues, but that has nothing to do with the firearm itself. So overall, my initial impressions of the MMP carry comp are very positive. Moving on to rounds 500 through 1000, going into these range sessions, I had a couple of goals set in mind. Goal number one being is that I wanted to get proficient with shooting on the move with the carry comp, and I wanted to get proficient with reloading on the move with the carry comp, and that's exactly what I did. During my first initial range session, I was having some issues with the slide not locking back whenever the magazine was empty. I'll go over my theory for that whenever we go over the overview of the pistol itself. So whenever I saw that was happening, I decided whenever the magazine was empty, I was just going to smack the red dot to rack the slide to chamber another round. Overall, that worked quite well, except for one time whenever I induced a failure to feed because I didn't smack the red dot hard enough. That was 100% my fault and nothing to do with the gun at all. I'll slow the footage down for you on screen so you can see what I'm talking about. I also think that it's worth noting at this point I still haven't cleaned or lubed the firearm. I took the gun out of the factory box and just got to shooting, and I plan on not cleaning it or lubing it until we're having consistent malfunctions with the gun. At this point, I feel extremely confident with the pistol. The ergonomics and trigger no longer feel different from the Glocks that I'm used to. That's mostly thanks to a ton of dry firing and 1,000 rounds of live fire at this point. At this point, my enthusiasm levels are still through the roof, and I couldn't wait to get out and train more with the MMP carry comp. Overall, so far, so good. I can't not miss the last shot. 1809 was the freaking time. I'm going to skip to a breakdown of the next 1,000 rounds just to save some time. This is where things get really interesting with the MMP carry comp. After that one failure to feed, which again was 100% user error and nothing to do with the gun, I had no issues for about the next 700 rounds. Then I started getting light primer strikes at around round 1750.
What was that? I heard you click.
Malfunction. The light primer strike. First malfunction, we're about 1,700 rounds in. So let's keep going and see what happens. Another malfunction. Hang on, let's see what it is. All right, looks like it was another light primer strike. It could be an ammunition problem or the fact the gun hasn't been cleaned. This is Herder's 115 grain, by the way. The light primer strikes were with 115 grain Winchester white box and 115 grain Herder's ammunition, but that's essentially Winchester white box because Winchester manufactures Herder's ammunition. Winchester white box is some of the cheapest, crappiest, and dirtiest range ammo you can buy. So instead of cleaning the gun, I thought it would be fair to try and do some troubleshooting to see if the issue would resolve itself. I switched the ammunition type to 115 grain CCI Blazer and 124 grain Remington UMC ammunition. I put 100 rounds of each ammo type through the gun and I had no malfunctions after that. That brings us to a round count of 2,000 rounds with one failure to feed, which was user error, so that doesn't count, and consistent light primer strikes with Winchester white box and Herder's ammunition. At this point, my confidence in the M&P carry comp has dwindled slightly, but I was still extremely enthusiastic about shooting the pistol, and I was committed to providing a thorough and useful review for my viewers. So I did the only reasonable thing, and that was to put another 1,000 rounds through the gun. Time was 10:42. I lost my dot on the second shot, but it's okay. For rounds 2,000 through 3,000, I am pleased to report that there was no malfunctions at all with the M&P carry comp after I switched my ammunition type. I did as many different drills and diversified my training as much as possible to see if anything out of the ordinary would happen. Still no issues. I also still at this point haven't cleaned the pistol and it's bone dry. The pistol sounds like an old screen door whenever you rack it really slow, and I think that's pretty awesome. With the range reports out of the way, the only thing left to do is to give you a complete breakdown of what I do and I don't like about the pistol. Let's get into it. We will start off with the slide and barrel. This is the compact slide on a full-size frame, giving you, according to the spec sheet, a 4.22-inch barrel with a 1-in-10 twist. But the rifling in the barrel stops where the comp starts, leaving you with approximately 3.7 inches of barrel instead of the advertised 4.22-inch barrel. But as you can tell by this chart from Ballistics by the Inch, it averages a loss of about 50 to 100 foot-pounds of energy and a loss of 50 to 100 feet per second. And that's going from a 4-inch barrel to a 3-inch barrel, making it even less of a loss on the carry comp. So I'll let you decide if that's worth complaining about. The Ballistics by the Inch chart is linked in the description if you want to check it out. While we're on the subject of the comp, we can go over my impressions of it. I think it does a good job of reducing recoil, probably by 10% or so. It does a good job of diverting the gases up and helping control the felt recoil impulse. The comp shines for me, especially when I'm shooting on the move and going to another target. I'll slow some footage down for you to see what I'm talking about. The comp allows me to forget about having to fight recoil a little less and lets me focus on reacquiring my dot for the next target. This is also coming from someone who's trained on nothing but stock Glocks for pretty much the majority of my training since I started taking it seriously about 2 years ago. Overall, I don't think the comp is just a marketing gimmick. I do think it's a legit selling point. Speaking of selling points, let's just take a second to appreciate how freaking good this slide looks on this pistol. The serrations are phenomenal and they just look fantastic. They are sharp enough to grip, but not overwhelming. They are placed perfectly, in my opinion, giving you plenty of real estate to grab onto in a variety of different angles and environments. If for whatever reason your fingers were to slip off the back of the serrations, you have some carry fins that you'll easily grab onto. The front serrations are angled backwards, helping you get a solid grip on them, and then the serrations on the back of the slide are facing forward, but they still provide plenty of texturing, allow you to grip it. On the front of the slide, we have 3 little relief cuts on either side of the slide and 1 big relief cut on top, helping reduce the overall weight and adds to the aesthetics of the gun. Last few things about the slide and the barrel, then I'll move on. The accuracy I've experienced with the pistol surpasses my capability, just like most modern firearms, which is a good thing. No complaints in the accuracy with the pistol. And my final talking point, both the barrel and the slide are stainless steel with a finish called Armornite, which translates to it's a proprietary hardened finish, which is supposed to aid in increasing the toughness of the gun while helping wear and corrosion resistance and reducing the surface roughness and light reflection from the finish, giving it the grayish tint that you see on the gun. I will say I have not been nice to this pistol at all. I just threw it in my range bag with all of my rifles and I let it bounce around freely. There is no significant holster wear anywhere on this pistol, and there's 1 mark right up here on the front of the frame, not even on the slide or the barrel. So overall, I'm a huge fan of the slide, the barrel, and the finish on the slide. Overall, phenomenal job, Smith & Wesson. Moving on to the sighting solution and the iron sights on the carry comp. The M&P series is able to host essentially any footprint of dot. They give you plates with the gun, but they're plastic, rendering them useless for any type of serious use. That's my personal opinion, and I'm sticking with it. Argue with me in the comments if you want. The inclusion of plastic plates isn't really a selling point for me. It kind of feels like they were just thrown in there so they can say they gave you something besides magazines. I'd much rather see the inclusion of a single metal plate, or maybe they could allow you to get a discounted plate of your choice from their website after purchasing the gun. That's bold thinking on my part, but I think it's a lot better than just including a bag of plastic. The iron sights on the gun are actually pretty good. The rear sight sight is blacked out and the front sight is a bright night sight. Like I said, the iron sights are nice, but they're pretty much irrelevant as soon as you throw a dot on there. They're not tall enough at all to be able to co-witness with whatever dot you throw on here. For the price of the gun, I think Smith & Wesson could have for sure given us taller iron sights. Also, apparently it's pretty common for the front sight to be off-center, come loose, or just completely fall off. Mine appears to be ever so slightly off-center, but it doesn't matter because I can't use it because I decided to use a dot, so who cares? Enough about iron sights, let's move on to something different. Let's go over this thing called the clear sight cut on the front of the slide here. This design redirects gases in a 45-degree angle away from the front of your dot to help your view stay unobstructed and to prevent your lens from getting caked in carbon or splattered with oil. I think this design has worked great for me personally. I haven't cleaned my lens once in my time with shooting it, and the only real debris I have on my dot is fingerprints and a little bit of buildup from around the edges. That's probably mostly due to the gun just bouncing around in my range bag. Overall, I think that's a nice little quality of life improvement. Good job, Smith & Wesson. Final sentiment, the iron sights are good, but as soon as you throw a dot on there, they become irrelevant, and let's just hope that your front iron sight is on there straight. I would have much rather Smith & Wesson just give us an extra magazine instead of try to give us a upgraded night sight and a bunch of plastic plates in a bag. That would have been a lot more valuable in my personal opinion. Moving on to the frame, and another selling point of the firearm for me personally. Like I said, this is the full-size frame, so Smith & Wesson gives you two 17-round magazines with the gun. We'll go over the magazines in a second. The frame itself is aluminum and brings the gun's weight to 28.1 ounces. The frame itself is metal, but the inserts are polymer along with the back straps. Smith & Wesson gives you a variety of back strap sizes to choose from. I've experimented with all of the back strap sizes, and my personal favorite has come to be the medium one. The inserts and back straps are textured aggressively, which I'm a big fan of. Good job, Smith & Wesson. Over time, as dirt and skin have permeated inside of these inserts and back straps, they have not dulled, so that's good. If I had to complain about something, it would be the insert on the front of the frame. It's just set inside of the aluminum and it wiggles around, and I can feel it when I'm handling the pistol. I don't actually notice it when firing, but it is one of the first things I notice as soon as I pick the pistol up from my local FFL. If Smith & Wesson wanted to replace the iron sights and the plates with something that's not an extra magazine, they can maybe take the time to cut the texturing into the actual frame itself versus giving us a polymer insert. That, in my opinion, would be another extremely desirable trade-off. Speaking of texturing, on the frame where my support hand goes, I did feel it slip around every once in a while, especially during hot days where I'm all sweaty strictly due to how slick it is. There is no texturing where my support hand goes at all on either side of the pistol. That's a little bit annoying. On the middle part of the frame where your support thumb will go, there's a perfectly cut out box allowing me to get a nice repeatable point of contact on the gun. It makes placing my support thumb on the gun intuitive, and I'm a big fan of that little design. On the front of the frame, you have a nice big piece of pick rail to accommodate any light you want to put on there. Big fan of that. While we're here, I'll talk about the magazine release and the slide release. The magazine release is placed nicely, and at first I thought it was recessed a little too far into the frame, but I've had no real issues pressing it to drop the mag. The slide release is also placed really well and has nice aggressive texturing on it to assist with hitting it to drop the slide. It is right under where my shooting hand's thumb is, and I did catch myself riding it, and that could be what was causing the lockback issues I referenced earlier. But there is literally no avoiding it. My thumb can't go anywhere else. And final talking point on the frame is this magwell. This magwell and myself just do not get along for some reason. You have to get it just right, or you're for sure going to fumble your reload. Call it a skill issue, whatever. The finish on the frame has held up well. There is one major nick right here in it, but that's no big deal. And then especially around the magwell, how hard I slam these magazines into the pistol sometimes, I'm surprised it's not more damage than it is. Overall, good job, Smith & Wesson. While I'm talking about the magwell, let's just go ahead and go over the magazines. Like I said, the gun comes with 2 and I bought 4. The only reason I didn't buy more is because of how expensive these things are. $50+ for a magazine is criminal, but they have held up phenomenally well, and I would hope so for the price. Just like the pistol, I threw them in my range bag and I let them bounce around freely during transport. The wear patterns are consistent throughout all 6 mags. Overall, no real complaints on the frame besides the lack of texturing, this little plastic insert that wiggles around, and the price of the magazines. Overall, good job, Smith & Wesson. Moving on to the trigger. The trigger is a big selling point for a lot of people, but to me personally, I feel like it's kind of mid. I think the stock trigger has way too much travel in it. If you could reduce it by about 30%, then I would be a huge fan. But whenever you eventually do hit the first wall, it has about a 4 to 4.5 pound brake with a nice solid reset. Overall, if Smith & Wesson could eliminate a significant amount of that initial travel, I'd be a big fan. So after all of that information, what is my final verdict on the Smith & Wesson Carry Comp? The barrel, slide, and coating are the real star of the show here, in my opinion. The comp does help with reducing recoil. The pistol is far more accurate than I am, and there's no major wear on my gun from the abuse I put it through. Plus, the aesthetics of the gun are amazing. The iron sights are irrelevant regardless of how good they are for low light performance, and the lack of texturing where your support hand goes easily can be fixed if Smith & Wesson chooses to do so. The polymer front insert wiggling around drives me crazy, regardless if it has no effect on functionality. I think the inclusion of a single metal plate or a discounted metal plate from Smith & Wesson directly would provide a lot more value than a bag of plastic, or just give us an extra magazine instead of trying to impress us with plastic. The magazines are expensive, but they are reliable and durable, which is good, but they are severely overpriced. The gun has been extremely reliable besides light primer strikes, which appear to be ammo related and nothing to do with the gun itself. I think if you're a Glock snob exploring other options, this is a great one to choose. If you are looking for your first handgun and don't want to be basic and buy a Glock 19, this is a good option to consider. I can't say how much I've enjoyed shooting this gun over the last several months. I never really felt inconvenienced, or I never really wanted to not shoot this pistol. I will say the biggest compliment I can give this pistol is my wife and I recently took a trip to North Carolina, and this is the pistol I took with me over a Glock. That is the first time in my entire life I have ever traveled without a Glock, and I think that alone speaks volumes to this pistol. Thank you all for sticking around until the end. As a treat for making it here, I will throw up some footage from our North Carolina trip after this video is over. I know time is limited for everybody, but thank you for spending your time with me. If there's any other firearms or accessories you want to see me talk about, let me know what they are in the comments. If you disagree or agree with anything I said, or think I've left something out, let me know what it is in the comments as well. But until then, I'll be back with more videos.